So hey everyone, let's just introduce ourselves and talk about what we're going to talk about. My name is Benjamin Tarsa. Right now I work as the Community and Marketing Manager for GamePedia.com. We're a large video game wiki website. We see about 20 million different visitors. If you ever use like Minecraft Wiki, Wowpedia, Dota 2 Wiki, Leaguepedia, Binding of Isaac Rebirth Wiki, those are all sites that we operate. We do a lot of work with indie developers and stuff like that. Just really about community sites where people can come together and share the knowledge of the games that they play, and other people can come and look up the information that they need to do. And then I got started with Mages I was at Georgetown studying online gaming communities. And then Chris and I have been doing panels for
Yeah, for quite a while. I'm Chris Hazard. As many of you have seen, I've done a lot of panels this year and many other years here. I run Hazard Software. We do strategy level serious games, so that's games for a purpose primary purpose other than entertainment. We do a lot of work with the governments, companies, stuff like that, looking at strategic problems. My background is I have a PhD in artificial intelligence, particularly the artificial intelligence of trust and reputation. How do you build trust and reputation systems that are resilient against attacks, and then how do you attack them? And a lot of the mathematics and strategy behind that. I've got a lot of other backgrounds in robotics and various things. And another little tidbit which is kind of minor, but I ran the Acron community forums for that game. And I am also affiliated with a new company called Sizzle, which is a startup looking to kind of build some games along with media and entertainment.
Cool. So today we really just want to kind of talk, and I want to keep it pretty open, so we'll probably just talk a little bit to set things up and then kind of start taking questions and opinions from you guys. I want to keep it kind of more an open Q&A forum discussion kind of thing.
A community discussion?
Yes, exactly. So I really just want to talk about collective intelligence in gaming, and what I mean by that is I think that today, or over the course of the last 5 or so years, smartphones and Wikipedia and wiki sites, is that people put in a lot of time. We all love video games, that's why we're here. We're gaming, we're not into video games. But we're at a point where we come together and we spend a lot of time not playing games, but rather making other types of sharing information about video games, whether it's YouTube walkthroughs, wiki websites, game FAQs, all this kind of stuff. And I think that affects having that knowledge at our fingertips. You get stuck in a game, you can just go look up what's the next step. And I think that has had an impact on how games are designed, how we play games, the whole space of YouTube and the rise of that. It's obviously really popular nowadays. So I think we're going to kind of look at the way that our ability to share information so easily and so readily, and how does that impact sort of the video games and the gaming sphere. I don't know, Chris, what was your kind of initial take?
Yeah, I think if you look at the history of it, it's kind of evolved greatly. I remember growing up in the 80s playing games. If I got stuck on something, I'd ask a couple friends, maybe one of them would have the game, probably not. I'd subscribe to Nintendo Power, and my options were quite limited.
Well, there was the hint line, right? $1.99, like they give you hints.
If your parents would allow you
to
do that. And I remember there was a couple games, Final Fantasy IV, I got stuck in one level forever because I didn't recognize that, there's one little path you can walk here that the sprite was a little bit off. And you get stuck in these games, and nowadays I feel like the only time you ever really get stuck is with skill levels.
Yeah, I mean, and there are sometimes I feel like even though I know I can find the answer, but I'm like, I don't want to access that collective knowledge, or I want to figure this out for myself. Although I get frustrated easily, so. And
then on the flip side, you also can, I used to be a completionist, and I remember when I, try to find everything in the game without any help, but diagram out where things were, and now all that is available to the nth degree, so the game designers have to put a lot of more content and hide it further in there. But then most of it is discovered very well. Although one funny thing about that is, knowing a lot of people who design games and build games for really being in the industry, many of them sometimes joke about the Easter eggs that they put in there. They had a slow day at work or just waiting on something, throw an Easter egg in there, and it still hasn't been found. So they still do exist.
Yeah, it's interesting because even a lot of people, so like with the wikis, what we do with a lot of games, especially when we think they're going to be very popular, is that we reverse engineer games, right? So we take a game like The Binding of Isaac, which is full of all kinds of secrets and tricks and things that you would never ever be able to figure out on your own, to be totally honest, right? You have to die from this creature and then this creature, 8 different things in a row to unlock something. Well, we can just, kind of, I don't do it, so I can't give you the technical details, but right, we pull all that information, break through the encryptions or whatever kind of obfuscation they have, to pull all that information out and then make it available in a collective knowledge source, which brings sort of some ethical questions about, if a game designer's gone through the trouble to hide that stuff to try and, maintain that level of secrecy in the different achievements and stuff, then, how does that affect the sphere when we then sort of put all that out there anyways? And if we don't do it, someone's going to eventually.
There's also some interesting legal precedents too. If you are trying to recount a game from the NFL, you'll get sued for doing that. But if you recount a game from a game that you've played, you won't, unless you put it on YouTube, and most game companies are okay with that, but a lot are not. And what can you share? If you write out every line of script ever spoken in a game, if you pull all the music off and put that along separately, where is the boundary drawn? And again, it depends on the company.
And then the difference between contributing and using, right? There's this sort of 90-10 content rule with a lot of user-generated content sites. So this goes for things like Reddit and YouTube. We see it really strongly on our wikis, the idea that 10% of our visitors create 90% of our content. For wikis, it's actually more like 1% or less of our user base creates probably 99% of the content that's out there. Have any of you guys ever edited video game wiki or any kind of wiki, Wikipedia, stuff like that? So and I think it feels good to sort of contribute knowledge. The question is, can I ask one of you guys to volunteer sort of why? Like why? Well, what is it that drives you to say, all right, I'm going to take a minute away from playing this game or whatever you're doing and say, I want to put that information out there? Yeah.
Well, at least from my experience, which might explain some of the hands, was that I've edited a wiki very little just because I saw a grammatical error. So even amongst the people who would raise their hands if you say yes, I have edited a wiki, it's very briefly and without being a major content creator.
I mean, I think it still counts. I think that's how a lot of people get started. Is fixing typos then you're like, well, this sentence could be worded a little bit differently, and the next thing you know, you're writing articles.
And then there's other people like myself. That's not how I got started. I got started with Wikipedia itself, and I deal a lot with mathematics of strategy and what have you. And I saw a number of things that were, I can fill in this, or this is missing this, and I started doing that. And most of it was fruitful, but I stopped doing it when I started getting reverted a few times. There's a couple articles, because I deal again with the mathematics of strategy, where it's you can prove it, you show all these different things. Where a few people said that I was being biased about certain things or whatever. This was irrelevant. Nick, no, I'm citing a mathematical journal on this, and this is a proof. And so there are those sort of wars that go on as well. And this is not relevant when it's...
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating, the communities that grow. I feel very fortunate to sort of be at ground zero for so many different, we run 750 different sites. So every day I get to watch communities sort of get started. One or two people will come, they start editing, and then there's this other people kind of tentatively start joining on the sides, and then all of a sudden these people are in this leadership role that they maybe didn't imagine that they would be in when they first started. I've got a guy, do you guys ever play Smite, the kind of third-person MOBA game? Yeah, it's a fun game. So we started the wiki for it, seeded all this basic information. We've got this one guy who single-handedly does virtually everything on the wiki. And I'm always on Reddit watching because people will post and be like, oh gosh, I was on wiki the other day and this is all wrong, or this needs to be updated, how come this isn't here? And the guy is always right there posting back. He's like, I'm literally the only person who does this. You want it fixed? Come help me fix it. So I just try and send him, in-game stuff whenever I think about it, because we need more people and encourage people to come join in to create.
And sometimes it's fascinating to see if there's a couple people who are leading the path, they get to name some of the strategies or some of the things in the game that don't really have names. And sometimes it's kind of funny, but sometimes there's these little edit words. And I think TV tropes is a great example of sort of if somebody comes in there and names it, and it usually sticks, but not all the time. Sometimes people come back in there and revert it, or even have wars over that.
So I want to ask, do you guys have any sort of, so we've talked a little about wikis and YouTube. Do you guys have any other sort of instances or examples of what you kind of think of as collective intelligence as it relates to? Yeah.
Message boards?
Message boards. Message boards is a great example where it's just a way that we can come together and just I don't know the answer to this, someone else here probably does.
But sometimes it's finding that information where it's answered repeatedly in different threads. and trying to herd that. And sometimes it helps to have a community organizer who can do that and point, oh, well, here's an index of all the different contexts. Or if you're new here, come see this thread, and we'll point you to the different places before you ask the questions. And that can be extremely helpful.
Or those great people who are like, they're like, hey, I noticed that there were 10 different threads that kind of about this subject, so I took all of that and compiled it into this one like mega document that now, will sticky at the top, and it's there for everyone who needs it. The other thing I think message boards that I think is really interesting, and I think you kind of touched on it with wikis, is that you might go to a message board because you're looking for the answer to the level 21 or whatever. But then message boards are something that you kind of get sucked into, right? You do that, maybe you just comment on some other posts. Next thing you know, you're over there playing forum games, and you become a part of this external gaming community, originally because you were seeking access to that collective store of knowledge. But then we see these communities, build up around all of these different projects, which I think is one of the most interesting aspects of it.
And sometimes it can move from one to another. In Acron, in that case, it was mostly on the forums. That was the core of it. And funnily enough, we announced Acron, and because it was sort of a heady time travel RTS concept, really novel, somebody came and created a community before we did. We had our placeholder site, we were working on everything, working in the back end, and bam, there was one out there 6 months ahead. And I was like, oh, this is kind of awesome. We gave him some insider information, gave him some goodies and stuff. And I went to go meet the guy one time, and I was like, oh, where I was living at the time was only about maybe a 2-hour drive. So I'm like, oh, hey, I'll give you a hands-on first person outside of an NDA to play this game, just to write what you want. And I'm like, well, where's a good place to meet? And he's like, let me ask my dad, because I can't drive yet. And I was pretty shocked because I thought that this guy at least was in college because of how he wrote and how he behaved. But I was like, oh, well, okay, is this kind of weird for me? Am I gonna? And then I did meet him, but going in there, and his dad was there, and he was there with his friend. It was not what I was expecting at all. So you get some interesting surprises like that.
Yeah, and it is really amazing because there's all different people that, and a lot of wikis especially I always come back to wikis because that's kind of like what I do. But I have been repeatedly amazed by the variety of people that do this, and they're mostly very sort of insular, right? That all these people work, they know each other, they're on IRC, they talk, but they tend to be very private people, and they work from home and they do things in their own way. And so it's kind of interesting to navigate and work with these communities because one person I'm talking to, she's a lovely 55-year-old lady who lives in Minnesota. This other guy, is from Switzerland or Sweden. We've got people all over the world. Even on my team of people that I work with, we've got people in the UK and Australia. We have some really weird meeting times because of that.
And sometimes because they're collected over some game, some common interest, even as diverse as they might be, a lot of times there's some other very common threads. In the miscellaneous off-topic, you might see some things you did not predict, but there's a significant sub-community within your own community on that.
Trying to think kind of some more different questions that might be.
One other thing that I always find amusing is sometimes when there's communities who build around using a game in a way that it was not intended. These can be fun sometimes. There's a skateboarding game, this is probably about 8 years ago, I forget what it was, but where it was a fine game and what have you, but the cool thing was how spectacular of a crash of an accident can you get your character to have. And all the videos, all the posts were focused around that, and that's what built the community up.
Yeah, I really love that sort of emergence that happens with games. It's one of the reasons that personally I tend to favor more open-ended, free, open world kind of games, because there's a lot more space for that kind of all right, well we have all these tools at our disposal. What kinds of crazy things can we do? What other games within this game can we create?
It reminds me of Tale in the Desert. It starts out there's no rules, and it's people govern themselves, and it turns into this for example, there's these challenges, and one of the challenges is build an obelisk, and so the community comes together and says, okay, to make it easier on everybody, instead of everyone just trying to build a bigger one, let's do an order where you build yours 1 stone high, I'll build mine 2 stones high, and then you get some dude that cuts and hits everyone off. So it's just interesting hearing you guys talk about it. It kind of reminds me of that game.
Yeah.
There's a really big community based on older games, like the ones that they were programmed using very limited resources, so they kind of full of holes. Like somebody recently posted a video of hacking Pokemon, I think Blue, where he was able to, through some quirks of the game, edit the RAM from the game itself. And he ended up like making a bootstrapper and actually hacking the hardware of the Game Boy and doing all these exploitative things through it. Same thing with Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Do you think that as we come and make newer games that have fewer flaws and are we get more, we don't see it anymore. I can't think of any games that have come out recently that have had this huge backlog of weird quirks that come out of programming.
I think it's because nowadays games get patched.
Well, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that it is like, there are a lot of things that have changed along with all of these other tools and things to create that's a really excellent point, because in 1998 when you bought a game, it came on a floppy disk and that was it. Like, there was no changing the game after that. There was no auto uploading. Most of us didn't even have the internet. If we did, it was that AOL or whatever. One of the themes that I just kind of noticed in talking now is that the idea of sort of creation, right? That collective intelligence is about building not just information stores, but also community, and talking about, right, this obelisk thing. So I wonder if it sort of taps into some kind of basic human desire to create things together, because obviously we know that we can create more in teams than we can on our own. And I wonder if that's something that kind of drives the collective knowledge gathering, is that need to just share things with other people.
And people also like to admire the creations as well, and sometimes that will even lead to celebrity status. We had, in Akron, we had Shadow Fury 333, who was the official community commentator, and he would there were a lot of competitive games, he would announce and commentate all those, and after a while he almost started being treated like a minor celebrity within the group itself, even though it was a pretty small group by the end of things especially. And if you build something, if you create something, whether it's a video, a stream, some in-game objects, some mods, all that kind of stuff, you really can get elevated to that status, especially as you build a community around you. And I just find it fascinating, these microcosms, that it's just like YouTube celebrities. You have people who are reaching as many people as the sitcom Friends reached, yet I've never heard of them because they're not in my particular area. Like, I have no idea who this person is. And we're ending up with a lot of the long tails being filled out so that you can really get into it and really these individual constructions.
Yeah, it really is kind of crazy. So I work with one friend who, she does a lot of work in the Minecraft modding community. And it's like this, because I had no idea. I mean, I play Minecraft every once in a while. It's a lot of fun. It's a fun game. I don't really do a whole lot. I'm not really deep into the modding scene. But I was with her at PAX out in Seattle, and just people were like stopping her and being like, oh my God, like, see her name on her badge or whatever. She's like, oh my God, are you Jade? Like, oh my gosh, I love you. I love everything. Like, I was like, this is really weird. I was like, people like know you. She's like, yeah, it's kind of a thing. And she doesn't like it. She doesn't like anyone knowing her name. She doesn't like putting her picture out there. But she does. She's inadvertently developed this weird status from her creations. It was kind of interesting. I saw a couple other hands. So, yeah.
One really interesting thing that happened with a community coming together around a game that I really liked was Twitch Plays Pokemon, which was a phenomenon.
I'm not sure if we call that collective intelligence.
Well, are there other games that quite created almost the majority of the story was in the fan art and fan community? Are there other good examples where a game had like a real narrative added to it by a collective group of fans?
It's a great question. I mean, I definitely think that, not quite in the same way, but I think that Minecraft is an example. Like, I don't think Minecraft would have the continual cultural pull that it does were it not for the modding community, right? Modding is what takes Minecraft from, and it's the servers, right? The things people are building together, the different mod packs, Feed the Beast, and Agrarian Skies, and right, you can turn out Minecraft into an MMO. And those infinite number of combinations and things that you can add to the game, I think, is what keeps it fresh. It's now been, what, 6 or 7 years?
Yeah, something like that.
It's like one of the most popular videos.
Was that 2008? No, it was after 2008. I think it was 2010.
2008 was when it think
No, I mean,
that's
that's
my first year of grad school.
back in the day.
Yeah.
Game wasn't actually.
Yeah, I think official release is later.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and we're talking about when it was like, I think I picked it up, it was like $5.95, which is crazy now, and had, 3 monsters and not a lot to do. And now it's still, their annual convention is as big as MAGFest.
Well, I mean, that was the thing about Minecraft. There wasn't the Nether back then. There wasn't, but people still was like, I want to go build a spaceship, and they went like, sure, your spaceship was made out of dirt, but it looked cool.
So that's one example off the top of my head. I'm gonna think on that for a few minutes, see if what else might come to mind.
You also, a little bit ago, you had mentioned people using a game for other than its intended purpose. And Minecraft's a really good example of that. There's people who have used like the redstone stuff to make an entire working computer inside of Minecraft.
Well, so here's a question though, that if Minecraft is essentially a sandbox game that is designed to give you the tools to do any of those things, is it really an unintended purpose, or is it just an incredibly creative purpose using the tools that are provided for you?
Or look at like Little Big Planet is a great example of that, where they intentionally built the game so that you could build all sorts of different things. I've seen computers in that, I've seen all sorts of fancy things. Now Redstone, I mean, it is a logic gate. Once you have, anybody who knows anything about computer science, has taken more than a couple semesters in college, knows that once you have a few fundamental things, you can build a universal computer as long as you have enough space and enough components to do it with. And I built, like there's a game a friend of mine made called Aura. I think he renamed it many years ago, where he had these big blocks and they're rolling and stuff. It was a game that had no graphics; it's all audio. And you were able to build. He built the game, and I'm like, oh, I wish I had a timer in this game, because I wanted to have like some sort of a race where you had to do something in a certain amount of time. I'm like, well, what I'll do is I'll build a wall behind here so you can't hear the stone, and I'll just have it roll and set up a couple switches and use it in-game mechanics. Now I built a timer. You can build logic gates and build all this stuff in it, and it's not that. It sounds really special and cool, but it's not quite that special. As long as the game has a few fundamental elements, not that many, you can do almost anything with it.
But I don't want to cheapen it too much. Say, like, I watched the video of a guy who built a 3D printer, right, that could print any color block, right? You put them in the chest, like, and it just pushed the button and it, like, printed out, like, in Minecraft, this 3D thing that you would design. And, like, I would never have, in a million years, thought to do that or figured out how to do it. And so I think that there is definitely, I don't think anyone ever expected those things to be built in Minecraft, although the tools are there.
They put the tools in, but I think people have pushed them well beyond what the Minecraft creators never expected them to push them.
Well, but the point that I was making is, as a game developer, it's easy to put the tools in. It's a little bit trickier to keep the game balanced. But once you have the tools in there, those easy to put in tools, now the game becomes this big sandbox like that. That's more the point I was trying to make.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Oh, I was gonna do a different topic if you had something else.
No. I would.
So you guys have been talking a lot about the collective intelligence, but at what point could you talk a little bit about the hive intelligence, where instead of everybody sort of influencing this one source of knowledge, where it's this one source of knowledge that's influencing everybody?
Well, that's actually exactly kind of what I wanted to segue a little bit, was the question of, so now we have these knowledge stores. Now what? What does that enable us to do that we couldn't do before? How does that impact? Chris, this is probably something you might be saying. How does it, knowing that those resources exist, how does that impact your design choices? Why are games different now that we have these collective knowledge stores than they were prior to that?
Well, there's also the point that people like spoilers. You'll like a story more if it's been spoiled for you, even if you don't want to hear the spoilers. Basic psychology that's been shown time and time and again. So, let's see. I think there's a lot of cases where there's sort of a push where one part of the community creates a lot of the content, and like Ben said before, you have the 10% of the community creating 90% of the content, or in some cases it's 1% or even 0.001% that's producing the content for everybody else. And as this starts going into the game developer or the company that's running it, of supporting those people, even though this person, you're spending so many resources supporting this person, they're creating content for you, and effectively, they're almost like a contractor or employee for your company, producing this content for them. And as payment, you're basically giving them fun stuff to do and validation and extra content.
In what ways do you think that the collective intelligence for games have a negative impact on games? Like, at what point do you think? Because I feel like in some cases they reduce the creativity in some games, because for one example, a game I'm playing a lot like lately is Dark Souls 2. And you look on the forum and stuff, everyone's looking for that one OP build, everyone knows what weapon to wait for and how to get to it, and just looks up that, and then you have 50 people all in the game, like everyone you PvP against is winning the exact same moment with the exact same weapon, and there's no more creativity in it because everyone's looking for that same OP build.
My favorite example of this, which I've given in some talks before, which is not obvious, is from a game called Sins of a Solar Empire. Anyone familiar with that game? Made by Stardock a number of years ago. It's kind of an older game. But the reason why you bring this up is it's an RTS, a space RTS. Stardock spent a significant effort trying to balance the game before it was released. They put a lot of effort into it. And they released it, and the community was like, hey, you know, this one strategy is dominant, this is a dumb game, why did you do this to us? This is obvious. And Stardock's like, about a couple weeks later, no, this is all you need to do is do this other strategy. And the community's like, oh, okay. And then somebody found a strategy that worked really well against that. And then that became the new norm, that became the dominant strategy, and everyone's like, oh, the game's broken again. And Stardock's like, no, the counter to that strategy is this. And so it was the community was anchoring on this is the way you have to do it, and people were not thinking outside of the box, and it pulled them in. Now that also says that Stardock didn't do a good enough job at communicating the effectiveness of different strategies and didn't do good enough communicating there. So that's a lesson learned for game developers, to make sure that you always, if you think or if you find that there's going to be a dominant strategy, make sure you try to give the players a way to figure out that some sort of rock, paper, scissors, non-transitive or intransitive game mechanic around that. And again, make sure you're engaged with your community so you don't end up with those where it keep being stuck. You can also take heat maps. There's all sorts of metrics that games keep track of now, can and do keep track of. So the game designers can look in there and see what's going on, where are people staying. Everybody is staying at this place on this map. They're not using all the rest of the resources. They're not using this gun at all. They're not using this thing. Why?
Yeah, I definitely think that there is this sense of having all the information at your fingertips in some ways can make us like dumber, right? There's no need to argue about things when we can just, whip out our cell phone and find the answer. I'm much less likely to struggle over a level in Portal for several hours, beating my head against the wall trying to figure it out. In the end, I think that the reward is much, much greater if I bang my head against the wall every day for an hour until I finally solve that puzzle, because I feel so good about that. There's like much more reward to myself than if I go watch a video walkthrough and it's like, oh, okay, ding, ding, like now I'm done. Like that takes a lot of fun out of the game, and I feel like some people, myself included at times, and I try really hard to stay out of the trap, but I inadvertently just sort of degrade the experience for myself. That I remove a lot of the rewards that I might get from solving these puzzles by just being like, well, I can just look it up. And then once you've looked up one thing, it's like a very slippery slope towards just having it open on your other, I have two monitors, so I can just open on the other monitor. It's just, so I think that's definitely one major negative in my view. I'm going to go back here and then we'll come back over here. Yeah.
So, talking about, how the collective intelligence sort of changed what you could do in games and all that. I used to play MUDs, and I loved those, and then I tried to get into MMORPGs, and I really couldn't, and I found like one thing that was really different is because you also get sort of the advent of the internet to walk through all that stuff. There's not really as much exploration anymore. Like MUDs, it was very much a traditional RPG like kind of play, but I was mostly just like wandering around looking at stuff. Not actually looking because it's text, but just wandering around and like I would either beat my head against something over and over again, or someone would come across me and say, "Oh, just do this."
Well, that's one of the things that I immediately thought of, the idea that collective knowledge in some ways affects, right, that in like a MUD, or I used to play an MMO called Nexus TK, which is Nexon's original MMO, that you have individual people who are like, grand high poobahs of information and game lore, right, that I know all of these stories, but there is no source of intelligence other than to come to those people and the storytelling. I think of it maybe similar to the way that, sort of the oral tradition, has more started falling by the wayside, right? We have different mediums of communication. We have more permanence in our communication patterns. And I think that that's kind of related to what you're hitting on there, the idea that it used to be that you had to explore things or you had to find someone who had that intimate knowledge of the world. Whereas now we've sort of taken, you can take that person out of the equation because you can just go, read a book about it.
And I think it also depends on the game. A lot of AAA titles, they want you to have a specific experience. They don't want you to have a bad experience, so they don't have that backlash. And so sometimes they'll constrain it a little bit. I think sometimes that makes you into the more linear games and the more sandbox games and diversifies, if that's a word, that a little bit. Divides. It's a word now. Diversifies. Use it. Make it word of the year.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, this might be correlation rather than causation, but once all this information started to become available, does that put any more pressure on the developers to make the experience more about story or more about the emotion that you feel from a game rather than about the raw mechanics? I know that one of the first rules of Dungeons & Dragons, for instance, if you're playing the game and mechanics start to get in the way of story, they say, like in the DMG, they say just ignore the mechanics, make a ruling, and move on so that the story can be enjoyed. In some of these older games, there wasn't a huge story, so just if you're mechanically going through and solving these puzzles by using a guide, that might take away. But now, maybe sometimes it's just better to get through a section that's really tough or that's tricky to figure out so that you can enjoy those other artistic aspects of the game.
I think there's a lot of variation, because I think that there are a lot of games out there nowadays, especially with the indie scene having really had a real renaissance over the last maybe just 3 or 4 years with Greenlight, Kickstarter, all this kind of stuff. Because I think there are a lot of really awesome games out there that are almost wholly dependent on their mechanics, right? That they're very simple, there might not even really be a storyline per se, but they're very mechanics driven. But then at the same time, there are other more story driven.
I mean, going back to the D&D example, some players really like to play for the story. They want to tell a grand story together, and I like for doing that. But some players, they also like the optimization. They like the struggle of finding that one weird rule quirk that makes their fun.
Right.
It's a lot of fun doing that and trying to beat the other. It's like, well, I can do this to your guy. And so I think D&D is very interesting in that way that it has two very different sort of like mindsets and they can play together as a thing. And I think that is a really cool thing. But yeah, I was coming back to like a weird mechanic that the collective intelligence and sort of in the place where it's failed is like the game Feds. There's still puzzles nobody's figured out yet.
Yeah, and I think that you do see that sometimes, and there's a game that I'm blanking on, which I'm really sad that I'm blanking on, but I played it a lot this last year. It's very popular. I think it was #1 on the App Store for a while. It was a mobile game where you played this sort of little black blob that flew. Anyone remember that game? The name of it? No, not World of Goo. It's a very aesthetic game, a very dark game with these sort of shadowy rabbits in the background. The art was just beautiful. I'll go look up on my phone in a little while, but the thing about that game was you played, it was a sort of the one-button game where you flew, but the developer really wanted you to get the full aesthetic experience. And so if you get stuck and you couldn't complete a spot, if you died a few times, it would ask you, do you want to skip this section? And that was
the Nintendo way of doing things.
the Nintendo way, yeah. What was that?
Badland.
Badland, yes, thank you. And the way it felt like to me, and Nintendo's a good example of it too, it felt very seamless in the experience, and I was glad that I got to experience the whole game without having to just get really frustrated and spend weeks and weeks on one particular section. And it made it want me to share it with more people as well.
Because the developers don't want you to hit a point where you just go, oh, okay, well, I'm never going to be able to beat this, and then you have your takeaway memory of the game is a negative one rather than a positive one.
Right.
Yeah, because no one likes beating their head against the wall. I mean, I started playing Assassin's Creed Unity, right? Just came out, I guess it's been out for a little while. But I only played for about 45 minutes before I got stuck on trying to sneak into some palace. And I did that. I did it like 3 days in a row. I spent an hour and a half getting caught by the guards over and over again. And then I was like, I'm done with this. I can't play this game anymore. I can't figure this out. And I wish it had just been eventually, I expected it to be like, yo dude, you're trying to go this way that you haven't noticed before, but it never did. It never gave me any clue.
What would your review score be for that game?
I mean, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. I really just wanted to get to the part where I was in Paris, but I don't know. I would say that I didn't play enough of it to give it a solid review score. But it was you know, it's pretty good.
I think you may be a lot more even-minded than a lot of the people who are reviewing on
I play a lot of different games that are both inside and outside of my genre comfort zone, and so I'm fairly lenient about games that as long as they're put together and have an experience that maybe it's not what I enjoy, but I know that other people are going to enjoy it, so I try not to be too harsh about things. I'm trying for a couple people. Let's go all the way in the back. Yeah, no, that's you. You're all the way in the back.
Okay. There was square back, so I want to make sure. So, going back to what Chris was saying about some of the fans sort of being contractors for the company, there's some instances where, for instance, I don't want to be too negative, but like there's a developer of AAA RPGs that's somewhat noted for bugs, and generally after their games come out, there's after all the bugs are documented, somebody comes out with a blog for the game that's bug fixes for literally hundreds, if not thousands of bugs. And I wonder if you feel like in some ways there's less pressure on developers because the community is going to step in and take care of certain amount of things.
Well, one thing that I'll say about that is the games industry is fiercely competitive. Back in 2008, 2009, four out of five games lost money. The fifth made enough to cover the other four. Now with the advent of all of the casual games, and all the people who throw together little Flappy Birds and put them up in the stores, it's less than 1 out of 1,000 games out there makes more than, I forget what, like $2,000 in revenue, that even makes back the money put into it. AAA games, they put so much into it that they have to make it back. So cutting out of the AAA titles, all the indies, they're getting by on so little money that they see it as, oh, I can keep more money I can eat next week. So I think it is, I attribute a lot of the price drop in games to a number of factors. One is that tools are making it a lot easier to make games that are very similar to games that already exist. Another is that Apple, I feel like, really hit the mobile game market hard in a bad way, because initially when they launched the App Store, you could only buy games, if you wanted to search for one of the most popular, it only sorted by the most number of purchases. The only way you could ever appear there was to sell your game for 99 cents. If you want to sell your game for $5, for $3, you'll never be seen. You'll make almost no revenue. And that dropped the price and pushed the price of mobile games down really hard. And only in the last few years have I felt like it's started to bounce back a little bit. Did that create more of the freemium model? Did that accelerate that and push us into that market situation? Who's to say? It's hard to determine if that's causality or if it would have just happened anyway. But those sort of things about engaging with the community and making the game good can really help for developers who did not have that big hit.
Well, I think this kind of also is all just reminding of like early access, which is obviously has kind of become a thing lately for better or for worse. Early access, obviously, you can tap into the community to help you find, right? Because the early access is essentially saying, rather than doing all of our QA, because even with extensive QA and all that internally, you will never ever play the game as much or in the same ways as the players actually will. And so early access, you put the game out there and you expect people to understand that it's not done and help you to make it better. But at the same time, you are effectively releasing your game before it's ready, and that causes a number of hardware problems.
And one other thing I'll make just as it's on the tip of my mind is that it's been interesting the way some games have tried to push you or persuade you to rate them highly. There was a game from EA, and I forget which one it was.
Wasn't that the
Dungeon something, where it would ask you, do you think you'd rate this game 4 or higher? Yes or no. If you said no, you kept on playing the game. If you said yes, it would take you out of the game to the rating scene.
I'm going to go back toward the back again, just because he...
Yeah, just to touch on that though, when you think about it though, yeah, it's crap they release a game that's not quite finished to a certain point. But at the same time, when you hand something off like that to the community, that also brings in kind of like the minds and stuff of the community to be able to fix that bug, or at least notice bugs that weren't even caught before they released the game.
Yeah, I
At the
think...
same time, that collective intelligence of the community puts together something that's actually pretty neat. So if you look at Fallout New Vegas, where they have all the weapons mods, Well, then, Sidney took that idea from a kid on the Nexus forums, where he came up with Fallout 3, where he could highlight all your items. Sites, suppressors, laser sites, that sort of thing. So sometimes handing that off to the community to produce a result later on is equally good, but also you have the input from the community that you didn't have before.
Okay.
Well, I think, again, to add on to what you were adding on to, which we were adding on to originally, I think 2014 was the year of games being ruined because of pre-order. So like, I think that there's a shift in priority for a lot of these AAA games. Indie games I don't think are as affected by it, but like, they're putting out these games because everyone wants them, and they want them June 29th. That's when I paid for it. I pre-ordered it, it's June 29th. So I think that facet of gaming, of it becoming, I mean, just like the entire pre-order mentality is, I don't know if they're just scrambling and they're put, another pressure is putting these dates on them, or if they're just like, well, it's coming out June 29th, like, screw you, that's what it is. Is that making, while it makes the community have to like find these mods and figure out how to make it work, like, it's still pushing these developers. While, I'm sure some of them just don't care, they just want to put out a game and they want to make money. Of course that happens in our industry, but I think that also some of it is this like, that, pushing us to get that immediate result as soon as we can the second we want it, like, I know this day I'll have the game, is inhibiting these game designers and these developers to not find all these bugs, to not figure everything out, because they have to, they're on a contract. Like, okay, well, we found this game-ending bug. Well, it's, the 28th. We have to go, like, we can't do anything about it. So that adds a whole nother level of like, like for us, but also on that developer to put on them.
Software development is hard. If you look at how aircraft software is developed, some of the core stuff, they will have 5 different development teams using different hardware, different programming languages, different backgrounds, developing the systems independently. They will put all of those together and the systems will vote on what they should do. And there's other groups that do some manned spaceflight things where they prove, here's a little block of code, they have a mathematician come over and prove that this block of code will work mathematically correct. And it needs to be, that box needs to be checked for everything, especially certain satellite and aerospace fields as well. If you want to pay for that, that is, now you're talking about tons and tons, $10 million for a small little application to do those sort of things. And given that the competition in the games market is so high, anyone can toss out a game, make a first-person shooter, a platformer in a couple of weeks, and it's quite polished. In order to compete with that free, you have to do things very quickly. So we have to ask ourselves as a community, if we want those highly polished games, we have to be willing to pay for them.
And there's also the other side of that, it's coming out on the 28th and that's the date. But then you also have the other end. You have the Blizzards and the Half-Life 3s. It's like, it's come soon, I promise, it's soon. And then, the company puts in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which the company, not even the designers themselves, the company doesn't want to do that forever. And, the community, I'm still waiting on Half-Life 3. I don't know about you guys.
We were joking the other night about having a Half-Life 3 countdown party at MAGFest, regardless of the date.
You've been hydrating up for a while here in the middle.
Okay, I was gonna say, and this never happens to me, but as far as betas go, there's been like this thing that I heard about where sometimes the beta community would develop like their own like community, right? And then when the game releases and it becomes slightly different, all the beta people don't like the game.
Anyone heard of the phrase Eternal September?
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, that was, gosh, I'm going to get my history wrong here, but when AOL launched, was it AOL or Prodigy or CompuServe, one of those, opened up things to the masses, they started pushing it all out, and it used to be this core group of people who were really enthusiastic about whatever, and now everybody came in, and that's kind of what happens. And I just totally botched the history on that. But the idea is that you get a huge, It's not good to you. There's a huge flood of new people who come in who don't know the social norms, who don't know that the community's already established all the rules and practices, and there's so many new people who come in that they flood and overwrite all of those new rules, and it sometimes can frustrate the old folks, the veterans.
Well, and it happens both ways. So this actually goes back to, I know you've heard about it. So I did a lot of research when I was doing my master's degree about what happens when MMOs shut down, what happens when communities essentially decide that, well, even though we feel this sort of cultural heritage from this game that we've played for so long, well, that game's being shut down. So we all moved to this other game. There's a great book by Cecilia Pierce, the video game researcher in University of Georgia, or Georgia Tech. She looked at this group who've been playing. There actually used to be a Myst MMO. It was in beta, never really escaped that. So they ended up shutting it down. And this group that she had been initially started, she just was doing like an ethnography and kind of got caught up in this whole movement. They ended up moving their group to their.com, which is kind of like a almost Second Life-y kind of sandbox kind of thing. And they just sort of rebuilt chunks of their world inside this other game. But they had a lot of sort of struggles with the existing communities there because other people in the existing their.com community felt like, well, now we've got all these sort of like foreigners coming. I mean, and it's a story you see in real life, in the real world too, I think, right? We've got all these foreigners coming in. All of a sudden, there's this huge group of them. They're pushing us out of where we used to live and changing the way things always used to be. But there's this process of sort of cultural adaptation that goes both ways, that the existing cultures learn to adapt to the newcomers, and the newcomers also, over time, learn some of those social rules and integrate them into what they used, what they brought with them.
That spurred sort of a creative thought, I guess, that I don't know if I've ever seen, but just to open it up to see if it'll ever happen. Gentrification in games. Has that ever happened in a community? Can anybody think of an example? I can't off the top of my head, but it's a real life example that I could foresee happening in games in the future.
How about like World of Warcraft, where you have like and I'm probably going to get it wrong, so someone out there can feel free to correct me more. But like arena battles, right? There was a time when arena battles were more of a genuine, just kind of people fighting, and then all of a sudden, you've got twinks, right, which are lower level characters, where you have a higher level character, but you go get all of the perfect gear and give it to the lower level character who might not be able to get it themselves, or people started creating bots that could just sort of fight very effectively, and then that sort of fundamentally changes how the arena works, and if you don't have those tools, you don't have the access to do those things, then you are sort of forced out of that neighborhood, if you will.
That's a good example, yeah.
So that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
Mm-hmm. Actually, just show hands. If you're asking a question, put your hands up. Does anyone have any other examples of gentrification? Okay, go ahead.
I think it's an example. Team Fortress 2 was a close, tight-knit community of people who were really good at it. They really focused, because they paid like $50, $60 for it. And then it went free after several years. And there was this massive influx, basically reverse gentrification, but massive influx of people who were free to play. They didn't know the rules, they didn't know how to play, and it caused a lot of the community to fall apart because the people who were playing in public servers, or any servers, they were all really good, they all had like this threshold of skill and knowledge. Suddenly it was 1 out of every 50 people was halfway decent at playing the game. It really took the community apart.
Yeah.
Dr. Pierce, I saw her speak a few years ago. She talked about this community, I can't think of the name of it, but it was where you could go in and you could create little pets and you could take care of them online. And this community came up with a credo of niceness that you had to sign on to, or they would drum your ass out of town. Over their pets, whatever. But yeah, so yeah, it can happen. People can pay. If enough people agree, that's all it takes.
Sounds kind of like a virtual homeowners association.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
not really an example, but I imagine gentrification can occur in a game that's pay to win, where all the people who play for free get drowned out by the people who have more money.
I mean, you'll have, and basically, the community becoming better. Like games, once they get old and stale, people are like, man, I've been playing this game for 2 years and I'm sort of done with it. But the people who stick around, they're the ones that, you want in that community. Like, you'll have people that come in, it's like, oh, they came out with a new expansion, we get a bunch of people coming back.
But then the people who stick around, they're the ones that, you know, they're good at the game, they are committed to it. And I think that's sort of the sort of scenario in which identification of a game can happen.
That's kind of like a hopeful note on that. So we're heading towards the end of our time, unfortunately. So I want to kind of loop back around to finish up, hopefully on my hand. And I want to sort of have a little discussion about what can or should we be doing with our ability of collective intelligence. What is sort of the pinnacle? What are the things that what can we take from this to improve the gaming sphere? How can we make games better? How can we make game better? How can we make our communities better through the use of sharing our knowledge with one another? It's sort of the question I want to end on.
I mean, I do know there are certain examples of collective intelligence sort of enriching a game's narrative. For example, in Portal 2, there was the ARGs, wherein there was like a sound effect or something in the game that you can process into a visual, I don't know, some kind of a audio-visual reader or something, and it produced a picture that helped enrich the game's narrative. Also, with like Braid, that game is so dense that you may not be able to understand the full scope of the narrative until you ask other people exactly what's going on. And I know another game, Nier, that has an entire companion booklet that wasn't released in English, and so you have to find somebody who is able to translate it to read it and sort of get the full scope of the narrative, exactly what was going on. So I think that's definitely a potential, a possibility.
Translation is another really good example. I don't think we haven't really talked about at all in terms of how these sort of the connection and wanting to share information and build these resources. That people out there are not even really creating information on like a wiki or something like that, but rather just taking what's already out there, usually in English, and translating it backwards the other ways to open it up, to make it more accessible for an entire new group of people. So that's very interesting things that happen. Yeah?
You just mentioned this, ARGs, and I think that's an entire game genre that when it's entirely an ARG from the start, that's something that can't exist pre-collective intelligence, or it's not nearly on a scale.
So augmented reality game?
Or alternate. Which one did you mean?
I'm actually not sure which, but the ones that, it's puzzles that are on a scale where you're supposed to solve it with the help of everyone who's playing the game. And it's all accessible online or sometimes in other more creative ways, but it's designed with collective intelligence in mind, and it's meant not for one player, but massively multiplayer in this collective intelligence way. So ARGs have collective intelligence to thank for their existence, which is really cool.
Yeah, because we just wouldn't be able to do it otherwise, you know?
Right, there's a game recently released, I can't remember the title, basically it was, you're trying to investigate this research facility, so you're collecting.
Talos Pistol?
Which one?
Talos Pistol?
Yes.
Oh,
And that one,
really cool game.
collective insurance kind of pulls down, so it's like, what do you find this, what do you think about that? And I think the designers, they could kind of take that and do something like they did with like Majestic, where they have fake input or, kind of Slenderman things into there, so you can keep people guessing, like, is this real, is not? And then keep them on the edge, would be a good other step.
Did they do that in Pennsylvania too? Like
Pennsylvania too.
townspeople who give the wrong information.
Right, I think mixing the two would really make an interesting game experience. It's like, if you just had the whole truth, whoever found it first would ruin it for everybody. But if you kind of had this response and back and forth, you can't keep it going longer.
This goes back to a comment that I feel like I've made in 3 other panels perhaps at MAGFest this year, is with all of these individualized experiences, with all of the custom content, is that going to bring us together or divide us as a culture? If we all have the shared experience, if we're all sitting there watching the same sitcom or the same 6 or 7 o'clock show back in the 1970s or 60s, we can all talk about that. We go at the water cooler, and we all understand that. We are talking about our interpretations of that. If we've each played a game, we have these extremely different experiences. Will it be as easy to talk about that, or will it just push us apart?
I think it keeps the communication going, because it's like Lost. Watch Lost, I've heard 5 different ways that it ended, or, Bioshock, when it ends, I've heard like 20 different, this is what it meant. No, actually, I think it meant this.
But again, like Lost being a TV show, it was all you had the same experience. It's not that your game ended this way, and you had these characters, and here's another person who had these other 12 different main characters than you did.
I mean, I think that I think honestly it does both. I think it does both things, and in the end, that really just serves to expand the breadth of the types of communities, right, that we have. You know, it's like, you know, people who play Minecraft versus people who play Call of Duty, like, there's not necessarily, but in the end, like, and MAGFest is, you know, the prime example of this, that, like, none of that really matters. Like, there are people here who probably aren't even really that into video games. They're just here playing Magic Card Draft all weekend. But that doesn't make them any less a part of what it is that goes on here, that we still share this sort of common DNA of the game, right? So I think that that is strong enough, that's underpinning the kind of connections that we make with one another, that having the diversification of the experiences in the games we play, I think just really enriches the community, and I think it just brings a lot more to the table. I know you've had your hand for a while.
So just to add on that sort of posit whether or not the individualized experience will have any effects on the collective attitude towards things. Comparing video games to like television is sort of the apples and oranges in a sense. Like if you compare the video game experience to a book or something that you're less guided on, you know, visuals or, you know, theme or, you know, anything that is left to your imagination, you know, it's sort of an uncontrollable byproduct that the individual will have their own experience, you know, and in games that are successful, you'll have a really wide breadth of individual reaction to it.
But it does also depend on the game too. If you're talking about something in the Final Fantasy series that you basically, you're on this, it's like a rail shooter of story basically, and it's a movie with a few interactions, versus Minecraft where it's just a big sandbox. That's more diverse than I think like books and movies, for example, or books and TV.
I think that the difference, having each person that plays the game experience something different actually helps the game some. Because you go and talk to someone who played the game, you share your experience with each other, and now you found that you can play through it again now, play it differently, and get a different experience. So it makes the games, knowing that there's another way it could have ended kind of thing, it makes it replayable. You can go play it again, you know, kill that character or not kill that character, change the entire how much the game's going to play, and have an entirely new experience like it was a new game.
I'll let you, I just ran this you behind you. Yeah.
So I think Minecraft just has a really great example of all this. Even just vanilla Minecraft, because you know you have the redstone stuff, and you like the base and the green things. But a lot of people probably didn't just figure it all out themselves. They went online, they looked up. There's almost sort of a technological advancement through Minecraft wikis and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, Minecraft I think is a great example, and I think a lot of sandbox games. So you know, from my vantage point doing the wikis and things, that whenever we see a sandbox game that looks like it's starting to build any kind of following, that's something that we immediately jump on, because wikis and sandbox, MMOs and sandbox, or MMOs and wikis, like, these are different genres that we immediately are like, we know that a sandbox game is going. I mean, Minecraft wiki is as large as, you know, our other top 50 wikis combined, basically. Minecraft wiki is really a ridiculously large website. And there's so much information there. The reason why, because you need it. You can't just walk into Minecraft on your own without any information, because you'll never figure it out. Like, because none of that exists in the game. That you need the external resource because the game wasn't designed to provide that information to you. Partially because of the way that it sort of organically evolved from a much lower state where it didn't have all that much stuff in it. But also because it's the kind of game that encourages exploration and finding the recipes and things like that. Unfortunately, we are just at the end of our time now. I just want to thank everyone for coming out and having this discussion with us. It's been really great hearing what everyone has to say. So, thank you.